Stellantis shares falling after the CEO, Carlos Tavares, resigned abruptly in Filibo. The CEO, Carlos Tavares, announcing that he's stepping down. This move follows a strained relationship with the UAW. The recent announcement by Stellantis CEO Carlos Tavares has sent shockwaves through the American automotive industry and broader manufacturing sectors. The decision to shut down Stellantis production operations in the United States and shift them abroad comes in the immediate aftermath of newly elected President Donald Trump's sweeping implementation of aggressive trade tariffs. These tariffs, aimed squarely at several of America's largest trading partners, were intended to stimulate domestic production and protect American industry. However, the rapid retaliation from those same partners has created a hostile global trading environment, resulting in higher costs and strained international business relations. Stellantis, one of the world's leading automotive manufacturers, found itself at the center of this economic storm, ultimately concluding that continuing operations within the U.S. under these conditions was no longer viable. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The tariffs imposed by the Trump administration were designed to penalize imports by adding significant duties on foreign-made goods. Steel, aluminum, electronics, automotive parts, and numerous other commodities were suddenly subject to much higher costs. The intent was to encourage companies to manufacture within the U.S., theoretically boosting employment and industrial output domestically. However, the interconnected nature of global supply chains means that no major automaker can operate independently of the global marketplace. Stellantis, which relies heavily on parts sourced from multiple continents, found itself grappling with rising costs on virtually every front. Sourcing raw materials, components, and even machinery now came with additional financial burdens, which began to erode profit margins and disrupt production schedules. As other nations responded with their own tariffs targeting American exports, the situation grew more complex. Key markets for Stellantis vehicles, including the European Union, Canada, and Mexico, began imposing steep tariffs on American-made cars and trucks. Suddenly, vehicles manufactured in the U.S. became markedly less competitive abroad. Foreign consumers saw price hikes, while foreign dealers and distributors began seeking alternatives to avoid the increased cost. This not only undercut Stellantis' sales performance in these regions, but also rendered the company's U.S.-based operations a liability rather than a strength. With the economic pressure mounting, Stellantis executives conducted an extensive review of their North American operations. Every aspect of the U.S.-based manufacturing footprint was evaluated, from supply chain logistics and labor costs to projected long-term competitiveness in global markets. It became apparent that continuing production in the United States would require either dramatic price increases, sure to alienate consumers, or substantial cost-cutting measures that could compromise quality and innovation. The third and ultimately chosen option was to shift production abroad to regions where tariff exposure was lower and operating conditions were more stable in the face of the emerging trade war. This move represents a seismic shift in American industrial identity. Stellantis is not just any car company. It encompasses iconic American brands like Chrysler, Dodge, and Jeep. These brands have long been woven into the cultural and economic fabric of the United States. The decision to offshore production marks not only a significant corporate pivot, but also a symbolic departure from a long-standing narrative of American automotive dominance. Factories that once churned out millions of vehicles annually will fall silent, and the skilled labor that powered those assembly lines will be displaced, with ripple effects throughout local economies and supporting industries. The implications extend well beyond Stellantis itself. Suppliers that previously provided components for domestic production must now reconsider their own viability, as contracts are lost or dramatically scaled back. Trucking firms, warehouse operations, steel producers, plastic molders, and electronics manufacturers that fed into Stellantis production pipelines all face the prospect of sharp revenue declines. Regions once buoyed by the presence of a major automotive employer may now confront economic stagnation or even collapse, as the loss of high-paying manufacturing jobs leads to reduced consumer spending and a weakening tax base. From a geopolitical perspective, the event underscores the fragility of protectionist trade strategies in a globalized economy. The Trump administration's tariffs were predicated on the assumption that other nations would be forced to capitulate under pressure, bringing jobs back to American soil. Instead, the policy triggered a tit-for-tat escalation, with each side attempting to outmaneuver the other. The result has been a cascade of unintended consequences, where companies like Stellantis are penalized regardless of their location as costs balloon and competitive balance is lost. Rather than fostering a renaissance of American manufacturing, the policies have accelerated offshoring and weakened the domestic industrial base. Additionally, the decision sends a chilling message to other multinational corporations operating in the United States. If a powerhouse like Stellantis cannot weather the economic turbulence created by tariff wars, smaller players may have even less resilience. Boardrooms across the country are likely to revisit their own strategic plans, potentially triggering a broader wave of divestment and relocation. Industries beyond automotive, such as technology, aerospace, and consumer goods, may also reassess their U.S. manufacturing commitments in light of these developments. In effect, the U.S. may find itself in a paradox, attempting to drive industrial growth through tariffs while simultaneously pushing industry away through the very same measures. The social ramifications are equally profound. The closure of Stellantis facilities will not just eliminate jobs, it will also disrupt communities, families, and generations of skilled tradespeople. Many of the affected workers are unionized, and their roles represent the kind of stable middle-class employment that once defined the American dream. For many, these jobs were more than just livelihoods. They were sources of pride and purpose, anchoring communities and creating intergenerational prosperity. With production moving abroad, the loss is not only financial but deeply personal. Retraining programs and temporary assistance may soften the blow, but the erosion of industrial pride and economic security will leave lasting scars. Meanwhile, the decision to relocate production is not without its challenges. Stellantis must now establish or expand manufacturing capacity in other nations, a process that involves negotiating with foreign governments, navigating regulatory environments, and ensuring that supply chains can be restructured efficiently. There are also risks associated with quality control, labor standards, and political stability in the host countries. However, the company appears to have concluded that these risks are less severe than the escalating costs and unpredictability now associated with the U.S. market under the current administration's trade policies. Consumer response to the announcement is likely to be mixed. Some loyalists may view the move as a betrayal, particularly those who feel a strong connection to the Chrysler, Dodge, or Jeep brands. For them, buying American is not just a matter of preference, but principle. Others may understand the economic rationale behind the decision and continue to support the brands regardless of production location. However, overall brand equity may suffer, especially if competitors use the moment to reinforce their own commitments to American manufacturing. The marketing challenge for Stellantis will be to preserve customer loyalty while navigating the perception issues that come with offshoring. Within political circles, the development has already sparked heated debate. Supporters of the Trump administration argue that the tariffs are a necessary corrective to decades of flawed trade policies, insisting that short-term pain is required to achieve long-term gains. Critics, however, see the Stellantis announcement as a clear indictment of the strategy, warning that further escalation could lead to a domino effect with far-reaching consequences. Lawmakers representing the affected regions are already pressing for relief measures, including tax incentives or federal assistance to mitigate the fallout. Meanwhile, international allies and rivals alike are watching closely, recalibrating their own economic strategies in response to America's evolving trade stance. The broader economic impact could be substantial. The U.S. automotive industry is a bellwether for industrial health, more broadly encompassing a complex web of dependencies that includes finance, energy, logistics, and retail. If Stellantis's departure triggers further contractions across these sectors, the result may be a drag on GDP, a spike in unemployment, and reduced consumer confidence. Stock markets sensitive to any signals of economic instability could react with volatility. Investment patterns might shift as capital flows toward more stable and predictable environments outside the U.S., depriving American innovation of the funding it needs to thrive. Educational institutions that have tailored programs to support automotive careers may also feel the effects. Community colleges and technical schools, many of which have forged close ties with local manufacturers, will need to adapt quickly to the new reality. Curriculums may have to shift focus toward different sectors or retrain students for export-driven or service-based roles. The psychological effect on students and aspiring workers who had envisioned careers in automotive manufacturing could be profound, potentially altering career paths and reshaping regional aspirations. From a technological standpoint, Stellantis's move may also influence where research and development are concentrated. Automotive R&D is closely tied to manufacturing. Proximity allows for rapid prototyping, iterative testing, and direct collaboration between engineers and production teams. By moving its base of operations abroad, Stellantis may also transfer a portion of its R&D functions overseas, potentially weakening the U.S. "S" role in shaping the next generation of mobility technologies. This could include electric vehicles, autonomous systems, and advanced materials fields in which U.S. leadership has been seen as critical to long-term economic competitiveness. Labor unions are likely to emerge as vocal critics of both Stellantis and the federal government. Having fought for decades to preserve jobs, wages, and working conditions, union leaders now face the sobering prospect of massive layoffs and the erosion of hard-won gains. Organizing efforts may intensify in other parts of the country as unions seek to defend against further attrition. At the same time, there may be a push for legislative reforms aimed at strengthening domestic labor protections, regulating offshoring, or re-evaluating trade policies altogether. Whether such efforts gain traction remains to be seen, but the Stellantis announcement will almost certainly act as a rallying cry. Environmentalists and climate advocates may also weigh in, albeit from a different angle. Depending on where Stellantis chooses to relocate, production emission standards and environmental regulations could vary significantly. Critics may argue that moving operations to countries with laxer standards undermines global climate efforts, even as governments strive to align industry with environmental goals. Alternatively, Stellantis may choose to double down on sustainability abroad, using modern facilities and renewable energy sources to achieve long-term ecological benefits that were harder to realize within older U.S. plants. In the boardrooms of America's largest corporations, the Stellantis decision is likely to become a case study in the risks of geopolitical unpredictability. Multinational firms increasingly operate in an environment where political decisions, rather than market forces, can reshape their cost structures and strategic imperatives overnight. The need for agility, contingency planning, and diversified operations has never been greater. For CEOs and CFOs weighing their own exposure to tariff-related risks, the Stellantis playbook may offer both a cautionary tale and a roadmap for adaptation. What is clear is that this is more than a corporate relocation. It is a moment of reckoning for American industry, trade policy, and economic philosophy. The assumption that tariffs could rebuild domestic manufacturing is being tested in real time, and early indications suggest that the costs may outweigh the benefits. As the dust settles, the United States faces critical questions about its role in the global economy, the resilience of its workforce, and the path forward for industries caught between national policy and international realities. The story of Stellantis's departure is one of difficult choices made under immense pressure. It reflects a global economy in flux, a domestic policy agenda driven by ideological conviction, and a company caught in the crossfire. While the final chapters remain unwritten, the immediate implications are clear. American manufacturing is entering a period of profound transformation, and the decisions made today will echo across generations. Stellantis's decision to withdraw manufacturing from the United States and reposition its production strategy abroad is not merely a singular corporate maneuver, it is a vivid representation of shifting tectonic plates in the global economic and industrial order. The automotive giant's retreat is particularly striking because it encapsulates multiple dimensions of transformation occurring simultaneously: strategic, political, operational, financial, and even psychological. With their exit, Stellantis leaves behind not just empty plants, but a vacuum in America's manufacturing identity, one that may prove difficult to refill under the current policy framework. One of the most revealing dimensions of this development is the way it underscores the fragility of industrial ecosystems. Modern manufacturing is not about isolated plants churning out products independently. It is about tightly integrated systems where suppliers, manufacturers, logistics providers, and service vendors interact continuously and with high precision. By removing the central hub, Stellantis's U.S. manufacturing base, the entire ecosystem experiences systemic disruption. Companies that built their business models around proximity to Stellantis operations will face existential questions. With contracts evaporated and predictability lost, many will either downsize, pivot dramatically, or go out of business altogether. In many cases, their investments were made with the assumption of long-term industrial stability. That assumption has now been upended. There is also a profound impact on local infrastructure. Automotive plants are not merely manufacturing sites. They are deeply woven into the municipalities that host them. State and local governments often build roads, upgrade power grids, and invest in public services to accommodate large-scale industrial operations. These investments are justified by the jobs and tax revenues such companies generate. Now, with the sudden withdrawal of Stellantis, many communities are left holding the bag, burdened with infrastructure designed for an economy that no longer exists. These sunk costs are rarely recouped, and their lingering presence only deepens the economic trauma felt by residents and local governments. Beyond the local level, Stellantis's exit triggers broader macroeconomic challenges. The multiplier effect in economics refers to how initial spending or loss of spending reverberates through an economy. When a major manufacturer departs, the immediate job losses are only the first layer. Workers without incomes reduce their spending, which affects retailers, restaurants, service providers, and other local businesses. Tax revenues decline, leading to tighter public budgets, school funding cuts, and reduced public services. The social safety net comes under pressure as more people require unemployment benefits, job retraining, and healthcare support. In areas already economically fragile, this cascade can become a vicious cycle, driving long-term decline. From the standpoint of supply chain management, the relocation of Stellantis production is a formidable undertaking. It involves reconfiguring thousands of relationships with suppliers, renegotiating contracts, and creating new logistics channels. The complexity of this process is immense, especially considering the just-in-time manufacturing model prevalent in the automotive sector. Even minor disruptions in this model can result in major delays or quality issues. While moving operations may reduce tariff exposure, it introduces new risks, such as labor disruptions in unfamiliar regions, political instability in emerging markets, and potential logistical bottlenecks. As supply routes are rerouted across continents, every stage of production, procurement, assembly, testing, and distribution must be recalibrated in alignment with the new operational geography. The financial consequences for Stellantis also warrant close attention. Relocating production is not an inexpensive endeavor. The company must invest heavily in plant construction or leasing, workforce recruitment, and training, regulatory compliance, and establishing localized supply chains. These upfront capital expenditures must be carefully balanced against the expected long-term savings from avoiding tariffs. There is also the matter of currency risk. Moving operations to new regions exposes the company to fluctuations in foreign exchange rates, which can impact profitability in unpredictable ways. Hedging strategies can offer some protection, but they come with costs of their own and cannot eliminate volatility altogether. Investor reactions to the Stellantis announcement are likely to be mixed. On one hand, markets often reward companies for taking bold steps to protect margins and long-term growth. On the other, a move of this magnitude introduces uncertainty, especially in the near term. Analysts will be closely scrutinizing earnings guidance, CapEx allocations, and performance metrics to assess whether the transition is delivering as promised. In the meantime, credit ratings may be adjusted, and shareholder sentiment may fluctuate in response to both real and perceived risks. If Stellantis succeeds in swiftly stabilizing its operations and resuming growth from new international bases, it could be seen as a masterstroke. If not, it could haunt the balance sheet for years. Domestically, the political fallout is intensifying. The decision presents a public relations crisis for the federal government, which touted tariffs as a lever to restore American manufacturing prowess. Instead, one of the largest employers in that sector has chosen to leave. This undercuts the narrative that protectionism inevitably leads to domestic job creation. The administration now faces mounting criticism from political opponents, labor groups, and even some within its own ranks who question the wisdom of escalating trade tensions. Policy debates are likely to intensify, particularly around the question of how best to attract and retain large-scale industrial investment in the U.S. Some may argue for revisiting tariff policies altogether, while others may call for new incentives such as tax breaks or regulatory relief to offset the damage already done. On the global stage, Stellantis's pivot may be interpreted as a green light for further economic realignment. Countries previously reliant on U.S. production may accelerate efforts to bolster their own manufacturing capabilities, attracting investment through more stable regulatory environments, lower labor costs, or preferential trade agreements. It could ignite a new wave of competition between emerging economies eager to capitalize on disillusionment with U.S. policy volatility. Nations such as Mexico, Poland, Vietnam, and India may find themselves in a favorable position to host relocated industrial activity. These shifts could change the balance of global manufacturing power over the next decade, with ripple effects across international politics and alliances. An overlooked but significant factor in Stellantis's decision is the role of automation and digitalization. Even as the company leaves the U.S., it is likely to embrace more advanced manufacturing technologies in its new locations. This includes robotics, AI-driven quality control systems, and smart logistics platforms. While these innovations improve efficiency, they also reduce the total number of jobs needed to produce each vehicle. In effect, even as Stellantis sets up new factories abroad, the jobs it creates may be fewer and more specialized. For American workers, this compounds the loss. They not only lose their current jobs, but may find fewer similar opportunities even in the global market. The future of manufacturing may be less labor-intensive across the board, leaving displaced workers with even fewer pathways to re-entry. The cultural and symbolic loss should not be underestimated. American cars are more than just machines. They represent decades of industrial achievement, technological innovation, and national identity. The brands within the Stellantis portfolio, like Jeep and Dodge, are deeply associated with American heritage. Moving their production abroad risks a rupture in consumer perception. It may dilute the authenticity of branding campaigns centered on American values such as rugged individualism, freedom, and innovation. Marketing teams will need to work overtime to maintain brand resonance, especially in a landscape where competitors may exploit the shift to gain patriotic favor among consumers. The academic community is also likely to study this moment as a pivotal case in international business strategy. Scholars of trade policy economics and management will dissect Stellantis's move for years to come. Case studies may emerge in business schools examining the interplay between national policy and corporate adaptability. These academic analyses will influence future generations of business leaders, many of whom will take away hard lessons about over-reliance on any single market, no matter how large or historically significant. Another critical dimension is the effect on innovation ecosystems. Automotive companies often anchor local innovation clusters, groups of startups, researchers, and educational institutions that feed into and benefit from proximity to a major manufacturer. Stellantis's departure will disrupt these clusters, stalling momentum for innovation in areas such as mobility, battery technology, and vehicle software. Talent may flee to more stable regions or to industries less exposed to the geopolitical volatility now shaping manufacturing decisions. This dispersal of knowledge and expertise could set back the U.S.'s competitiveness in emerging tech sectors tied to the automotive industry. Insurance and risk management professionals will also reassess their frameworks. With political risk now playing a decisive role in operational decisions, insurance providers must evaluate how policies cover losses related to trade disputes, relocation, and workforce dislocation. Actuarial models will evolve, and premiums may increase for companies operating in high-tariff environments or under unpredictable regulatory regimes. This added cost further complicates the calculus for businesses trying to navigate an uncertain global economy. Consumer psychology, while harder to quantify, is no less affected. When consumers learn that a once domestic product is now manufactured abroad, their perceptions often shift. Even if the quality remains high, the emotional connection may fray. For a significant portion of the population, buying made in America carries intrinsic value. Stellantis must now convince these consumers that value still exists in their vehicles even as the label on the manufacturing tag changes. Failure to do so could open doors for rival brands that maintain domestic production, leveraging patriotic marketing to siphon off loyal buyers. From a regulatory standpoint, Stellantis's move may trigger scrutiny from watchdogs and oversight bodies. Questions about compliance with labor laws, environmental standards, and international trade rules will take center stage. If production is moved to countries with lower oversight, critics may accuse Stellantis of chasing deregulation at the expense of ethical responsibility. NGOs and advocacy groups may begin campaigns to highlight perceived injustices in the company's new operations, potentially pressuring the company to adopt higher standards or risk reputational damage. The decision will also have knock-on effects in the legal sector. Labor disputes are likely as unions challenge layoffs and demand better severance packages or redeployment opportunities. Class action suits may emerge from workers who believe their rights were violated. Meanwhile, local governments may consider litigation to recoup losses from broken incentive deals or infrastructure investments. The legal terrain will become increasingly complex, requiring skilled navigation as the company repositions itself in the global legal ecosystem. At the intersection of urban planning and economics, the long-term consequences of industrial withdrawal will shape how cities develop or decline. Urban centers that once thrived due to proximity to automotive plants must now reinvent themselves often, with limited resources and uncertain prospects. Some may pursue revitalization through tourism education or technology incubators, while others may slip into decline. The architectural remnants of shuttered plants stand as monuments to a bygone era, hulking reminders of industrial loss and policy miscalculation. The shift also highlights the growing strategic importance of energy policy. Automotive production is an energy-intensive endeavor. Stellantis will consider not just labor and tariff conditions, but also energy prices, infrastructure reliability, and access to renewables when choosing new production sites. Countries that can offer clean, affordable energy will have an advantage in attracting the next generation of automotive manufacturing. For the U.S., energy policy thus becomes inseparable from industrial policy, and decisions about oil, gas, solar, and wind power will increasingly influence where and how companies invest. Stellantis's strategic retreat is thus a defining moment, one that will reverberate through boardrooms, factories, communities, and capitals around the world. It challenges assumptions, forces introspection, and demands a reevaluation of how we understand value labor, policy, and progress. Whether it marks the beginning of a broader exodus or a wake-up call for recalibration remains to be seen. What is certain is that this single decision has illuminated a multitude of tensions at the heart of 21st-century economic life. As the implications of Stellantis's production shift continue to unfold, a subtler but equally significant transformation is occurring in the dynamics between multinational corporations and national governments. Traditionally, governments have held a degree of leverage over companies by offering favorable business environments, incentives, and infrastructure support. However, in a world of fluid capital and mobile production, the balance of power is shifting. Stellantis's decision reflects this new paradigm, where corporations, not governments, often possess the ultimate agency. They can uproot, reposition, and reconfigure themselves to optimize their cost structures and mitigate exposure to regulatory or political threats. This mobile nature of capital weakens a nation's ability to anchor economic activity through policy alone. In this evolving context, countries must now compete globally, not just on tax rates and regulatory friendliness, but on geopolitical predictability. This skills gap is further exacerbated by educational and infrastructural challenges. While the U.S. has world-class universities and engineering programs, it lacks a coherent national strategy for aligning workforce development with the needs of modern industry, particularly in regions most affected by industrial flight. In rural and post-industrial areas, the collapse of traditional manufacturing has often not been met with an equally robust investment in retraining, broadband access, or new industry cultivation. Stellantis's departure exposes these weaknesses, highlighting how localized economic policies often fail to keep pace with global economic shifts. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. The good news is we build 80% of our vehicles in the U.S., so we're the least affected and the most able to absorb them. You know we're doing everything we can to mitigate them. The announcement by Ford CEO Jim Farley that the company will shut down production in the United States and shift its operations abroad sent shockwaves through the business and political spheres. This dramatic move was prompted by a rapidly evolving economic climate, following the newly elected U.S. President Donald Trump's sweeping implementation of tariffs targeting major trade partners. What was initially framed as an effort to protect American industry has triggered a global trade conflict, culminating in counter-tariffs from foreign governments. These escalating tensions have made it financially unviable for American companies to maintain competitiveness both at home and abroad, especially for a global automaker like Ford. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Ford's decision marks a significant moment in U.S. manufacturing history. As one of the oldest and most iconic automakers in the country, the company's legacy is deeply intertwined with the story of American industrial strength. For over a century, Ford has been a symbol of domestic manufacturing prowess, innovation, and blue-collar jobs. Its departure from U.S. soil, even if partial, signals more than just a business shift. It reflects a seismic change in the global economic order and the role the United States plays within it. The tariffs introduced under the new Trump administration were designed to reduce the United States trade deficit and protect domestic jobs from foreign competition. These duties targeted imports from several key economic partners, including China, the European Union, Canada, and Mexico. The president framed these actions as part of a broader America First economic strategy. However, the retaliatory measures imposed by these nations have led to severe unintended consequences. Key materials required for manufacturing, such as aluminum, steel, and microchips, have become significantly more expensive. The same can be said for vehicle components and other goods that Ford sources internationally. This has severely impacted the company's ability to manage costs and remain competitive in a global market where profit margins are already thin. In response to the protectionist policies, Ford's leadership found themselves at a crossroads. The reality of higher production costs in the U.S., coupled with reduced demand from foreign buyers due to reciprocal tariffs, created a perfect storm. The company's exports declined sharply as its vehicles became more expensive in foreign markets. At the same time, the cost of importing necessary parts rose, driving up production costs domestically. In this double bind, the logic of continuing large-scale operations within the United States eroded quickly. Jim Farley's announcement did not come lightly. The decision followed weeks of internal assessments, economic modeling, and consultation with global stakeholders. Ultimately, the data painted a grim picture. Maintaining manufacturing operations in the U.S. would lead to unsustainable losses and a weakening of Ford's global competitiveness. By moving production abroad to countries with more favorable trade environments and lower production costs, Ford seeks to stabilize its operations and protect its long-term viability. The implications of this move are vast. For the American workforce, this decision spells the loss of thousands of jobs. Ford employs tens of thousands of workers across assembly plants in Michigan, Kentucky, Ohio, and other states. These facilities have long served as economic anchors for their communities. The closure or downsizing of these plants will ripple through local economies, affecting not just plant workers, but also suppliers, contractors, service providers, and small businesses that depend on the manufacturing ecosystem. Entire towns could be economically hollowed out, setting off a wave of joblessness and economic insecurity. Beyond the human toll, the closure of U.S.-based production lines raises serious questions about the country's industrial strategy. For decades, the U.S. has prided itself on being a leader in advanced manufacturing innovation and large-scale production. Ford's departure signals that this leadership is under threat. The notion that tariffs would bolster American manufacturing has been undermined by the reality that in a globally interconnected world, isolationist policies often produce the opposite of their intended effect. Instead of incentivizing domestic production, these tariffs have made it too costly and too difficult for companies to remain within U.S. borders. From a geopolitical standpoint, Ford's exit adds fuel to the fire of global tensions. Other nations already wary of U.S. trade policies may interpret this move as confirmation that America is turning inward. This could prompt further realignments in global trade networks. As countries seek new partners and build more resilient supply chains that bypass the U.S. entirely, emerging markets and countries with favorable trade agreements, could stand to benefit, positioning themselves as alternative hubs for automotive production. This shift could further marginalize the U.S. from future industrial and economic growth trends. Investors and shareholders are watching these developments closely. Ford stock saw a spike following the announcement, reflecting investor confidence that the move abroad could improve the company's bottom line. However, this short-term gain masks a deeper concern: the long-term erosion of domestic industrial capacity. Once manufacturing capability leaves a country, it is incredibly difficult to rebuild. Skills are lost. Infrastructure degrades, and the innovation pipeline becomes fragmented. The U.S. risks losing not just jobs, but also the technological and intellectual capital that comes with being a manufacturing powerhouse. The announcement also raises broader philosophical questions about the role of corporations in society. For years, American companies have marketed themselves as pillars of national strength and community. Ford, in particular, has leaned heavily on its patriotic branding, often aligning itself with the ideals of hard work, resilience, and American ingenuity. Yet when faced with unfavorable economic conditions, the company has chosen to prioritize survival and shareholder returns over national loyalty. This isn't unique to Ford, but it does underscore the tension between global capitalism and national economic policy, a tension that continues to widen in the current political climate. Economists have long warned of the unintended consequences of protectionist trade policies. While tariffs may offer short-term relief for certain industries, they often lead to price inflation, reduced trade volume, and economic inefficiency. In Ford's case, these effects have converged with devastating clarity. The cost of producing a single vehicle in the U.S. has surged not just due to material costs, but also logistical delays and regulatory burdens. Compounded by falling demand abroad, these pressures made continued U.S. production untenable. The labor unions that represent Ford workers have expressed outrage and dismay. Many had initially supported the idea of tariffs, believing that they would safeguard American jobs. Instead, the opposite has happened. Union leaders now face the grim task of negotiating severance packages and transition plans for workers who have built their lives around stable employment at Ford plants. Retraining and redeployment programs, while helpful, cannot fully offset the loss of income and community stability that these closures will cause. The political fallout is equally complex. While some in the Trump administration defend the tariffs as necessary for long-term national security, critics argue that these policies have backfired catastrophically. Legislators from states affected by Ford's decision have voiced strong opposition, warning of widespread economic damage. For the president, this development represents a direct challenge to the central tenets of his economic agenda. If more companies follow Ford's lead, the narrative of tariff-driven industrial revival may collapse entirely. Internationally, Ford's shift in production may embolden other multinational corporations to consider similar moves. Already, global companies operating in sectors like aerospace, electronics, and pharmaceuticals are reevaluating their presence in the U.S. If the trend continues, the country could see a broader exodus of manufacturing capacity, reversing decades of economic development. This would weaken America's position in global supply chains and diminish its influence in shaping the future of global industry. There are also environmental considerations to account for. Moving production abroad may lead to increases in carbon emissions, depending on where the new facilities are located and how they are powered. Countries with lax environmental regulations may offer cost advantages, but at a global cost. For a company like Ford, which has made public commitments to sustainability and green manufacturing, the relocation of production could undermine those goals. Moreover, the logistics of importing finished vehicles back into the U.S., if that is part of the plan, could further increase emissions and transportation costs. At a cultural level, the move is deeply symbolic. Ford has long stood as a representation of American innovation, the middle class, and the promise of economic opportunity. The company's iconic status has made it a fixture in American life, from its pioneering assembly line to its ubiquitous pickup trucks. By relocating production overseas, Ford is not just changing its business model, it's altering its identity. This will have a lasting effect on how the brand is perceived both domestically and globally. For consumers, the long-term impact may be mixed. On the one hand, Ford may be able to keep prices relatively stable by avoiding the cost burdens associated with U.S. production under the new tariff regime. On the other hand, concerns about quality control delivery times and customer service may arise as production becomes more geographically fragmented. The company's ability to maintain its reputation for reliability and craftsmanship will be tested as it adapts to new operational realities. The global automotive industry is already in a state of flux, driven by shifts toward electric vehicles, automation, and digital integration. Ford's move must also be seen in this context. By moving production abroad, the company may gain access to regions that are investing heavily in EV infrastructure and next-generation manufacturing. Countries in Asia and Europe, for example, offer robust incentives for green manufacturing skilled labor and access to emerging markets. This could allow Ford to better position itself for the future, even as it abandons its historical roots. The logistics of such a massive shift are daunting. Relocating production facilities requires months, if not years, of planning, investment, and regulatory navigation. Supply chains must be restructured, local partnerships must be formed, and new labor forces must be trained. The transition will not be seamless. Disruptions are inevitable, and the company must brace for challenges ranging from political pushback in host countries to internal resistance from stakeholders accustomed to the old ways of doing business. As Ford begins this next chapter, it will be under intense scrutiny. Every step of the transition will be analyzed, critiqued, and politicized. The company's ability to execute this shift efficiently will determine not just its financial success, but also its role in shaping the broader debate around globalization, trade, and economic nationalism. In doing so, Ford finds itself at the heart of a much larger narrative, one that touches on the nature of modern capitalism, the future of work, and the limits of national economic policy in a globalized world. What started as a policy decision intended to protect American interests has now spiraled into a moment of profound consequence. The departure of a titan like Ford from U.S. manufacturing is a wake-up call. It underscores the complexity of economic interdependence and the risks of abrupt shifts in trade policy. As the country grapples with the fallout of these decisions, it will need to confront difficult questions about how to reconcile domestic priorities with global realities and whether the current path offers a sustainable vision for the future. Ford's decision to exit U.S. manufacturing operations in the wake of rising tariffs continues to ripple across industries, institutions, and ideological fault lines. While the immediate shock of the announcement has gripped public discourse, the wider implications stretch into sectors far beyond automotive manufacturing. This event serves as a prism through which the vulnerabilities of American industrial policy, the limits of political intervention in global economics, and the fragility of supply chains are all being brought into sharp focus. A critical dimension of this shift lies in the long-term reconfiguration of global manufacturing networks. Ford's withdrawal from the U.S. will not occur in isolation. It will necessarily lead to the formation of new industrial clusters abroad. These clusters are likely to emerge in regions with advanced infrastructure, government incentives, skilled labor availability, and integration into international trade frameworks. Countries such as Mexico, Vietnam, and India, already popular destinations for automotive investments, stand poised to absorb Ford's capital talent requirements and strategic planning. This inflow will inevitably result in the rise of new economic zones, specialized training programs, and ancillary industries that cater to Ford's expansive operational needs. This transfer of manufacturing excellence has geopolitical consequences. As Ford begins investing in countries that offer economic and regulatory stability, it will become a stakeholder in their development. These partnerships may evolve into diplomatic relationships, with Ford acting as a conduit of soft power. In countries where it relocates, Ford may not only drive employment, but also influence education's policy, trade priorities, and technological initiatives. Governments will compete for the automakers' favor, adjusting their policies to be more business-friendly, potentially weakening labor rights or environmental protections in pursuit of foreign direct investment. The loss to the U.S. economy is not limited to direct job attrition. There is an invisible yet deeply consequential layer of impact: intellectual and technological erosion. Much of the research and development that supports automotive manufacturing is closely tied to production facilities. Engineers working near assembly lines have the advantage of rapid prototyping, real-time problem-solving, and iterative design processes. By offshoring production, Ford risks fracturing the synergy between its engineering departments and its manufacturing arms. While digital collaboration tools can bridge some of the distance, the richness of direct, on-the-ground coordination is difficult to replicate in a dispersed global model. Universities and technical colleges in the U.S. also stand to lose. Many have developed curricula, apprenticeship programs, and research centers tailored to the needs of domestic manufacturers like Ford. With the automaker's departure, the demand for such programs will decline, leading to reduced funding, fewer opportunities for students, and a diminished pipeline of skilled labor in automotive engineering. This academic contraction will take years to recover from, and in some regions may not rebound at all. In the financial sector, Ford's move introduces new variables for investors, analysts, and economic strategists. While the immediate market reaction may reflect approval based on cost-saving potential, the long-term investment narrative is far more complex. Investors will need to navigate increased exposure to foreign regulatory risk, currency fluctuations, and political instability in host countries. Additionally, Ford's fixed costs will rise during the transition period, as it builds or renovates factories abroad, negotiates contracts, and relocates its logistical infrastructure. These capital expenditures will strain cash flow in the short term, potentially affecting dividends and reinvestment capacity. Supply chain restructuring will be one of the most intricate components of this transformation. Modern automotive production relies on just-in-time delivery systems, cross-border coordination, and tightly sequenced logistics. Ford's move means reevaluating thousands of vendor contracts, shipping routes, customs requirements, and distribution strategies. The learning curve for establishing a smooth supply chain in a new country is steep and fraught with risk. Even a minor miscalculation can result in delays, production slowdowns, or quality control issues that could damage the brand's reputation. Automation and robotics, long heralded as the future of automotive production, will also play a nuanced role in this transition. While moving operations to lower-wage countries provides immediate cost advantages, Ford is likely to integrate higher levels of automation in new facilities to future-proof its investments. This creates a paradox. Countries that benefit from job creation now may see those benefits diminish over time as machines replace workers. It also raises moral and strategic questions for Ford, whether to prioritize short-term economic impact or long-term operational efficiency. Within the broader American industrial ecosystem, Ford's departure could catalyze a domino effect. Major suppliers from tire manufacturers to electronic systems providers may follow Ford overseas or suffer from the loss of business. This exodus would affect hundreds of small to medium enterprises that rely heavily on the automotive sector. The resulting contraction in demand could lead to bankruptcies, consolidation, or permanent job losses. These suppliers, often less adaptable than Ford, may not have the financial or strategic capacity to relocate or pivot to other markets. This move also challenges the cultural and psychological underpinnings of American capitalism. For much of the 20th and early 21st centuries, there has been a deeply ingrained belief in the ability of American industry to weather any storm. Ford's decision flies in the face of that optimism, suggesting that even the most iconic brands are not immune to the pressures of a globalized economy. It signals a shift in narrative. From resilience and reinvention to retreat and realignment, this could dampen public confidence in other American manufacturing institutions, creating a climate of anxiety and diminished faith in the country's economic trajectory. Consumer behavior may also begin to shift in subtle ways. While brand loyalty has traditionally shielded automakers from significant backlash, today's consumers are more ethically and politically aware than ever. A segment of the American market may begin to reevaluate their purchasing decisions based on where a vehicle is made, not just how it performs or what it costs. If perceptions of Made in America begin to erode, Ford could face a challenge in maintaining its market share against domestic competitors who manage to keep some or all of their production on U.S. soil. The transportation and logistics industry within the United States is yet another area likely to be affected. Railways, trucking companies, and shipping terminals that service Ford's U.S. operations will see reduced activity. Some of these providers may have to lay off employees, consolidate routes, or seek new clients, while others may disappear altogether. The overall reduction in freight volume tied to Ford's supply chain will have a depressive effect on local economies connected to this infrastructure. Government agencies and public sector partnerships will also feel the loss. Local and state governments have long used tax incentives and public funds to attract and retain manufacturers like Ford. These investments, often justified on the promise of long-term employment and economic growth, may now appear wasteful or ill-conceived. Policymakers will face heightened scrutiny regarding their use of public funds and their ability to craft viable industrial strategies. The loss of Ford could even become a central talking point in political campaigns, especially in battleground states where economic identity is closely tied to manufacturing. The ramifications extend into national security discussions as well. A country's manufacturing base is not merely an economic asset, it is also a strategic one. The capacity to build complex machinery, like vehicles, is linked to the ability to produce military equipment, respond to emergencies, and maintain sovereignty in times of crisis. Ford's move diminishes that capacity. In a scenario where international tensions limit access to foreign markets or logistics, the United States could find itself with insufficient domestic infrastructure to respond effectively. This strategic vulnerability has implications for defense planning, disaster response, and critical infrastructure resilience. Insurance, legal compliance, and regulatory affairs also enter a period of flux. Moving production overseas opens Ford to a new spectrum of legal frameworks, everything from environmental regulations to intellectual property protections. The complexity of ensuring compliance across multiple jurisdictions will increase administrative overhead and expose the company to new forms of liability. Differences in labor laws, unionization rights, and workplace safety standards could also lead to reputational risks or legal entanglements that further complicate operations. The emotional and psychological toll on Ford's workforce is profound. For many employees, working at Ford was more than just a job. It was a legacy, a source of pride, and a foundation for upward mobility. The closure of plants erases this identity for thousands of families. Generations of workers who once saw Ford as a pathway to the American dream now face uncertainty and disillusionment. The ripple effect of this collective loss will be felt in the form of declining morale, reduced community engagement, and possibly increased mental health issues among affected populations. Insurance providers and pension funds connected to Ford's labor force must also reassess their exposure. As employees are laid off or transferred, actuarial assumptions regarding risk pools, payout timelines, and contribution levels will need to be updated. For retirees and near retirees, there could be fears about the stability of their benefits, especially if Ford restructures its obligations as part of its global realignment. Media narratives surrounding this development will continue to shape public perception. How journalists, analysts, and opinion leaders frame Ford's decision will influence its impact. If the move is portrayed as a betrayal of American values, it could spur grassroots activism, boycotts, or legislative efforts to restrict corporate mobility. On the other hand, if it's framed as a rational response to failed economic policy, the focus may shift towards systemic reform. Either way, the way this story is told will affect how it is remembered as a pivotal turning point or a cautionary tale. This turning point challenges long-held assumptions about globalization, economic nationalism, and the responsibilities of multinational corporations. It raises difficult questions about how the U.S. balances sovereignty with openness, protection with progress, and identity with adaptation. Ford's decision is not just about one company's bottom line. It's a reflection of the tectonic shifts reshaping the global economy and an early signal of what may become a defining era in American industrial decline or reinvention. Would you like a summary of the key points now? The monumental shift initiated by Ford's decision to cease domestic manufacturing and operations abroad continues to unravel additional layers of complexity that go beyond economics, touching everything from urban development to global labor dynamics. As the dust begins to settle, the wide-ranging consequences of such a transformation are coming into sharper view, illuminating structural vulnerabilities and social paradigms that had long been papered over by the myth of American industrial permanence. One of the more deeply affected arenas is urban infrastructure. The cities and towns that have long hosted Ford plants often structured their physical and civic development around the presence of such industrial giants. Roads, bridges, utilities, and even local zoning laws were tailored to support heavy manufacturing. When a company like Ford departs, these infrastructure systems lose their core purpose. The result is a kind of urban obsolescence. Water treatment facilities built to service large industrial operations become oversized and underfunded. Public transit systems designed to ferry thousands of plant workers daily suddenly find themselves underused and unprofitable. The misalignment between infrastructure capacity and community need leads to decay of both physical assets and civic morale. Real estate markets in these affected regions are likely to shift dramatically as well. Commercial property values near former production plants will fall, leaving behind ghost zones that attract neither investors nor new industry easily. Residential markets may suffer a similar fate. Homeowners who bought property based on stable employment at Ford may find their homes underwater in value, prompting a wave of defaults or migration. Neighborhoods built around generational employment may face demographic collapse as younger residents seek opportunities elsewhere. This kind of economic migration can create regional brain drains and further strain already fragile rural economies. From the perspective of international trade architecture, Ford's exit represents a deviation from the post-war economic consensus that defined the United States as the anchor of global capitalism. For decades, the country served as both the manufacturing hub and the ultimate consumer in a balanced global order. With Ford's manufacturing pivot, the U.S. is now voluntarily ceding part of its role as a production leader. This shift will have consequences in trade agreements, investment flows, and regional alliances. Countries receiving Ford's new investments will leverage this realignment to negotiate more favorable trade terms with other partners, sometimes at the expense of the U.S., thereby diminishing American leverage in multilateral trade forums. Labor dynamics abroad will also undergo transformation. Ford's arrival in new countries will alter local employment landscapes in significant ways. While initially providing an influx of jobs, the presence of a multinational automaker will also reshape wage expectations, union organizing efforts, and labor mobility. In economies where job security and benefits are not yet well established, Ford's employment model could set new standards or conversely be accused of exploiting gaps in labor protections. In countries where unions are nascent or politically suppressed, Ford's operations might ignite labor movements, leading to broader societal shifts. Conversely, in regions where labor is plentiful but regulatory oversight is weak, concerns over worker exploitation and unsafe conditions may rise. Moreover, the environmental impact of this relocation cannot be ignored. While U.S.-based manufacturing operates under stringent environmental regulations enforced by agencies such as the EPA, Ford's new operational centers may not be held to the same rigorous standards. This regulatory disparity opens the door to increased emissions water usage and industrial waste, especially in countries with loose enforcement mechanisms. Environmental degradation in these host countries may emerge as a major point of contention, with local communities bearing the brunt of industrial pollution and its health consequences. NGOs, environmental watchdogs, and global health organizations will likely increase scrutiny on Ford and similar companies, pressuring them to maintain ethical environmental standards regardless of geographic location. Culturally, Ford's move marks the symbolic unraveling of the post-Depression industrial ethos that viewed American corporations as pillars of national identity and civic engagement. Ford was not just a business. It was a narrative one that linked the prosperity of a nation to the success of its industries. By offshoring its production, the company effectively severs itself from that traditional identity. This disassociation will have consequences in terms of how younger generations understand the role of corporations in society. Civic loyalty, which once compelled companies to support local schools, sponsor community events, and invest in regional development, is likely to be replaced by a colder, more transactional model of corporate citizenship governed by global calculus rather than local allegiance. Education systems will undergo their own recalibration in response to Ford's decision. In many parts of the country, high school and community college curricula were adapted to meet the technical requirements of Ford's manufacturing needs. These include specialized programs in robotics welding, CNC machining, and automotive diagnostics. With Ford's exit, educational institutions must either reinvent their programs or risk obsolescence. This will be a challenging transition. Institutions often rely on corporate funding, equipment donations, and mentorship programs to maintain the relevance and viability of such training tracks. Without a clear replacement, schools will struggle to provide job-ready skills to their students, further widening the gap between education and employment. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Ford moving abroad after Trump's tariffs and retaliation? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.